everyone, and welcome back to the Unhealthy Podcast. I'm your host, Uncle Marv, and on today's show, well, let me just start by saying this. Most of us have been there. The x-rays look fine. The blood work is normal, and yet the pain is still very real. Maybe you've been told it's just aging, arthritis, or something you'll have to manage for the rest of your life, and that's annoying because I'm in that category. So the question is, what if the real problem isn't in your bones or your joints, but it's actually the muscles that no one ever checks? Well, today we're going to talk about that. My guest today is muscular therapist Julie Donnelly, who has spent nearly 4 decades helping people around the world get out of chronic pain by treating the muscle tissues that often completely get overlooked. Julie, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me. I really appreciate it.
All right. So I want to start the show a little different. Normally we get into the background and history, but I want to start with a question that I want to get out of the way so that people listening to this don't start to think, yeah, okay, I think that's deep tissue massage. And I'm like, I don't think that that's it. So I wanted to ask you right off the back, what is the difference in what you do versus deep tissue massage?
But I think the biggest difference that people notice is I don't slide on the skin. And because I don't slide, I don't need oil. And because I don't need oil, you don't need to get undressed. I just work through your clothes.
Okay.
And the only thing, you take off your belt, and I ask you not to wear jeans because the seams are just too thick. But other than that, I just work through clothes. And what I do, because I'm not sliding, I'll find a knot or a spasm, and I center my fingers on that. But flat fingers, that's another thing. Like a lot of massage therapists, they're using the tip of their thumb, or they're because they're sliding, they're doing a lot of moving stuff. But they're using the tip of their thumb to do trigger points. What I do is I find that to be too invasive, and I use 3 fingers laying flat on the muscle with my opposite hand on top of my fingers pressing down. So it's a deeper treatment than what's normally called deep massage. And so this is much deeper, but it actually hurts less because you're not sliding. I'm just in one place, and I gradually go deeper and deeper, in seconds, but you don't feel, it's not a shocking thing for you because I'm going easy into it. And then I get to where is the appropriate level for that particular point. And then I just hold it there. And then I slowly come off, and then I slowly go back on again.
So you're not doing what most people do when they do those types of things where you're kind of, you said sliding across the skin. A lot of times they're looking for those knots.
Right.
And just trying to, break up the knots. And when I talked to somebody else about that, they talked about, well, you can't break up the knots. You've got to do this acupuncture thing to get down in there and all of that stuff. So I knew we were way off track when we talked about that.
Right. Yeah. I think a lot of mine could be looked at almost like acupressure.
Okay.
Obviously not acupuncture. There's no needles involved. And because I'm using 3 fingers, look at if you hold your 3 fingers, middle fingers together, that's the width that I'm pressing on the spasm. Whereas with other therapists, they're using just their thumb. So it's a much more pointed technique. And what I find is the thumb, it's almost, in my mind, it's almost like it's too invasive. And so it hurts. It just really hurts. But if you can try it yourself, just take 3 fingers and press as hard as you can into like the top of your opposite hand, your opposite arm. And press with the 3 fingers really hard.
Right.
Like as hard as you can. And then come off, and then just use your thumb and press as hard as you can. And you'll see what I mean.
Okay.
It's more painful. And yet what I'm doing, because I also have let's say my left hand is on your arm and my right hand is on top of my left hand. So I'm using two hands for pressure down. And it really is more pressure than what the thumb is, but the thumb is just more invasive in my point of view.
Okay. And what you're doing really is from what I read, you're chasing the pain, because people that come to you, they're not coming just to, oh, I have some aches and pains. Let me, make my body feel good. They're coming with something
Right.
specific, right?
Yeah. Everybody comes with something. Nobody ever comes to me just to relax.
Okay.
I mean, it just doesn't happen. I mean, pain is stressful. And so you're not relaxing if you're in pain. So as I release the pain, you do relax. I always say if somebody falls asleep with me, they're really tired.
Interesting.
So, but I think what actually really happens is when you're in pain, you put out endorphins, and the endorphins help you to relax.
Okay.
And I always stay at your tolerance level. And so I ask you multiple times during the session, is that tolerable? I don't say, is it painful? Because I know it's painful. But is it tolerable? And I tell people at the beginning, even people who've been coming to me for years, I'll say it again. I'll say, make sure you tell me, because if it's beyond your tolerance level, your body's going to contract to protect. And that's the last thing we want to have happen. So don't be brave. This is not a no pain, no gain situation. You tell me if it's too much, because I can lighten up and then gradually go deeper and still get as deep as we need to be, but take it in steps. It doesn't have to be all at once.
Okay. So now that we've got that, let's go back and I guess start from the beginning and, kind of talk about how you actually got into this, because it seems that this is something different. It's not something that you learn
Right.
as a massage therapist.
Yeah.
I don't know of any doctors that have actually targeted muscles, not to say that there aren't, but that's not something I've heard of. So how did you get into muscular therapy?
Well, I haven't heard of doctors doing it either, so we're both in the same place.
Okay.
So what had happened to me was I worked for an airline at the time, and I was on a temporary 3-month assignment to Hawaii from December to March, which was really difficult to go from New York to Hawaii in the wintertime, but somebody's got to do it. So it was awesome. But anyway, I was sailing. I made all new friends, obviously. I didn't know anybody in Hawaii. And so we were sailing. And on Friday nights, they used to call it the Friday night sailboat races. And they were large sized boats. They weren't little ones.
Not the little sunfish type things?
Yeah, no. These were big. Like the one I was on was 45 feet.
Oh, real one.
Yeah, they're really big ones. And so we'd be out there sailing, and it was great. I mean, I was rail meat. I mean, I came from New York. I didn't know how to sail. But what rail meat is so they'll say, you, and you get on port, you, and you onto starboard, move up here. And they would move us around. We were like the ballast on, on the sailboat.
Okay.
But the guy that was our spinnaker, now, not the spinnaker, excuse me, the big, colorful sail that's at the very front of a sailboat. You've seen them, I'm sure.
Uh-huh.
Well, that's a seriously stressful position during a race. And so his name was Adam, and he was up there and he was, doing his thing. But when we got back and we cleaned up the boat, you'd call it putting the boat to bed, and everybody's getting off. And when Adam stepped off the boat, he literally collapsed in the ground in screaming pain, like literally screaming pain. And nobody knew what to do. So they were walking, they were like going into the yacht club. And I knelt down and I said to him, what can I do to help? And he said, oh, just rub my back. And I knew as much about the body as 99% of the world, which means I knew nothing, right? I mean, we all know the Popeye muscle, and we've all seen the skeleton on Halloween. But that's pretty much where my knowledge ended at that point. And so I started to rub his back, and I'd go over a bump. And when I went over the bump, he would jump because it hurt. And so I didn't want to lose it, so I kept my fingers on it. And I'm trying to figure out what am I supposed to do with this thing. I don't know what I'm supposed to do with it. But as I kept my fingers on it, it just melted, just like if you had an ice chip under your fingers, and then it would just be gone.
Mm.
And that's what happened. Well, when it would disappear like that, Adam would go, like a sigh of relief. So I thought, well, that's pretty cool. So then I looked and I found another bump. He jumped, I held it, he sighed. And it kept going on. And then finally he fell asleep. And I thought, well, that's pretty cool. He goes from screaming pain to sleep. That was fine. Well, we ended up doing it every Friday night. Get off the boat, he'd lay down in the grass, I'd work on his back. And then as an aside, he bought me dinner. I mean, I thought it was a good deal.
Yeah.
Right.
Now, was he in pain every Friday when you were doing this?
Pretty much. I mean, the pains weren't as bad as they had been. And like now I understand what was going on. And so what was happening is we weren't getting the source. We were working on the symptom. But I mean, it still gave him relief.
Right.
But it wasn't treating the source. Anyway, so at one point I was trying to get a new career at that time. And so people had started gathering around just to see what it was I was doing because, I mean, they didn't know. I didn't know. I mean, I knew I did what I did. And so one day I said to a woman, I said, do you think people would pay for this? She says, getting them out of pain? Yeah, they'll pay for it. I says, what do you think it is? She says, I have no idea. Right? Because it clearly was not massage. I mean,
right.
I had no idea. So I was getting stationed back in New York. And so when I got back to New York, I went to a massage school. There's an excellent massage school in New York City called the Swedish Institute, if anybody wants to go to massage school in New York. Anyway, so I went to the Swedish Institute and I told them the story and I showed them what I was doing. And they said, well, you're not doing massage, but you do have to have a massage license in order to be able to touch people. So that's how I ended up getting a massage license.
But they knew that you were going to be doing something completely different, and they just said, yeah, take the license anyway.
Well, you had to have the license. In order to touch people, you have to have the license.
All right.
And so I did, and I learned how to do massage the way everybody else learns how to do massage. But my first job after I graduated school was on a cruise ship, which was kind of like you died and went to heaven. It was so much fun. It was so much fun.
Now, did you intend to just start doing massages and work in your stuff that you had learned?
Well, no, because I hadn't learned any of the stuff that I did.
Okay.
I learned traditional massage like everybody else does it with oil, sliding, and there's things called petrissage where you're kind of it's like kneading it. So I learned it the same way everybody else did. But when I got the job on the ship, I mean, I was working really hard. You work really hard on a ship. And I was working 6 hours a day. I was doing half hours. So I was seeing 12 people a day. But I found within 3 weeks, this massage thing was definitely not for me. It just was not for me. I didn't like it at all. And then I thought, Julie, get real. You went to massage school for a year. For a year, you rubbed oil on naked bodies. Why did you think it was going to be different? Right? But what I realized is when I was in school, I wasn't rubbing on a leg. I was rubbing on a rectus femoris and a vastus intermedialis. And I was, it's like my mind's eye I was working on because I was still learning my muscles. So what I did on the ship is I called it the muscle of the day. And if you ever go to my TED Talk, I did a TED Talk called the question no one is asking, the pain question no one is asking. But anyway, And so what happens is nobody's looking at muscles. So I decided, okay, I'm gonna do what I call, just a regular Swedish massage, except I studied one muscle a day. And in the beginning of the day, I would sit down and I'd have my muscle book and I would write it. I had a notebook and I wrote it in the notebook, the origination, the insertion, all the information about the muscle. And then you would come in as a passenger. I would do a regular Swedish massage everywhere except on that muscle. And on that muscle, I'd go much deeper. I'd go much slower. If I felt anything, I'd say to you, Marv, are you feeling anything? And you'd say, well, it's real funny. You're pushing here, but I'm feeling it there. So I'd run over to my desk and I'd write, pushed here, felt there. And so I'm working on 12 people a day. Well, if we're talking biceps, that's 24 biceps. And everybody's in different condition. You have some people are very muscular, some people are certainly not muscular. And so you had like all these different the same muscle, but in different conditions on every person. And it very much was a school. I mean, I had made myself a school.
Right.
And I learned a lot.
But these people weren't having pain in those areas, were they?
No. On the ship, most people were coming just to relax.
Right.
And that's fine. I mean, that was my job.
So they were your guinea pigs.
They were my guinea pigs. They were my subjects.
Okay.
Right. But what happened this one day, actually it's in the TED Talk. This woman comes, and so I had started this thing with the top of the head. So you have temporalis, and then this is called sternocleidomastoid, and the masseter muscle here. And it was this muscle right here on the top of your shoulders. It's called the levator scapulae. And levator scapulae, the nickname is called the shrug muscle because when it contracts, you lift your shoulders up, you shrug. So, okay, it's day 4 and I'm learning this one. So she's on her back and I have my hand underneath her neck because you have to do something with your hand, your left hand. So I had it under her neck and I was working on the top of her shoulder with my right hand. Well, my left finger felt what I thought was a spasm in her neck. And so I had my finger on what I thought was a spasm and I'm working on her shoulder. Well, at the exact same time that the muscle in her shoulder released, I felt the spasm move in. And I thought to myself, oh my gosh, that was a vertebra. I'm not allowed to move vertebra, right? And I got nervous because, I didn't realize I was still too brand new to have realized.
So anyway, that was something that as a massage therapist, you're not supposed to touch bone.
Well, you're not supposed to move them.
Okay.
That's definitely, you're going to touch them, but you don't move them. And I wasn't trying to move it. I thought it was a spasm. I thought it was a muscle spasm until it moved. And then I got spooked. I was like, oh my gosh, I'm not supposed to do that. And at the exact same moment, she calls out, she goes, oh my God. And I said, what? And I kind of let go of her. And I thought to myself, oh no, my God, I've paralyzed her. So she said to me, I have had her horrible headache for 3 weeks. It just this second stopped. And so I looked at her and I just went, wow. And I didn't even have to write that one in my notebook. I can still see everything about it because it was traumatic actually. But I realized when I was finished with that I knew I was going to specialize ultimately in the treatment of chronic pain. Because to think that this woman was going on this, cruise, you've been waiting for it, you're excited about it, and she's had a headache for 3 weeks. And this was already probably day 2 of the cruise. And now she was fine. And I thought, that's really good. I like that.
Interesting. Now, you had committed to the cruise, so how long? We're not talking one of those week-long cruises, are we?
Yeah, they were a week-long. For them, it's a week-long cruise. I was on it for a year. So people say, well, where do you live? And it's like, well, I live here. I live, 2 decks below where we are. No. Where do you live? No, I live here. I really do.
People don't realize I have a client that works in Port Everglades, and they're on the ship. That's their home.
Right. That's home. You pull into a port, you go out, you go shopping, you go grocery shopping or
Yeah.
whatever you want to do. But it's a great life.
Okay, so day 2, this happens, and you decide, well, this is what I'm going to do, but yet you're on the ship for another year.
Well, I use it as a classroom.
Okay.
There's 300 muscles in the body, and there's 600 altogether because you have 300 pairs. Now, there's some muscles that we don't get involved in as a massage, or unless you learn visceral massage, which I have not done that. So you're probably dealing with maybe 150 to 200 muscles that we actually deal with.
Okay.
And so every day I had a different muscle. And every day I would study another muscle and really know it well so that by the end of the day, I knew that muscle. And then I would always take opposing muscles. So if I did biceps today, I would do triceps tomorrow because they're opposing muscles.
Right.
And so that it helped to lock it in my brain, that fact. But I spent the whole year as a classroom.
Interesting. All right. So if we were to speed ahead, because I'm sure you have great stories.
Oh,
on
thousands,
the cruise.
thousands. We could be on this show for a week.
Yeah. But, the day comes when the cruise ends and, you've kind of already decided what you want to do. So how did you translate that into a job, a career? What was the next step?
Well, when I got off the ship, I got off in St. Thomas because it was beautiful. So why not get off in St. Thomas? And I had, I always feel like I've been divinely guided in where I need to be and what I need to do. So when I got off in St. Thomas, I ended up meeting this gentleman who was a retired osteopath. And I don't know, like if you know, an osteopath is a medical doctor that kind of specializes in the whole body. It's a wonderful, wonderful career to be an osteopath. But anyway, he was an osteopath. And so I would go to their house, and first I would give him his massage, and then he'd get up, and then his wife would get on the table, and I'd give her massage. Well, he immediately found out that I know more about muscles than most massage therapists because of the studying that I did. But the more important thing was that I wanted to learn more than most massage therapists. Like I was not happy with just status quo. Well, because of that, so when he would get off the table, his wife would get on and give her massage. He would then come back into the room and he would teach me osteopathic techniques that are valid with my massage license. And they're definitely things we're not taught in massage school. And then what we would do, I was so blessed. What we would do is his wife would make us a lovely lunch, and the three of us would sit on the lanai and have lunch, and then she would go off and do whatever she was doing. And for the whole rest of the afternoon, we would sit there, and he would explain to me why muscles do what they do and how this muscle affects that muscle and how you see the pain wherever the pain is, and you start following it backwards. So if the pain is in this muscle, well, what muscle would cause that? And you just keep going backwards until you finally got to the source. And then when you got to the source muscle, then you would apply the pressure that I was explaining to you in the beginning, and you would hold it, and he taught me how to search around, and inevitably the person would be better. So it was exciting. And when I left St. Thomas, I ended up going back to Hawaii, and I worked in an office where we only worked with people who had workers' comp or auto accidents. And so the insurance company is paying for me to work on your shoulder. I'd better not touch your leg because they're paying for me to work on your shoulder. So that's when I started putting all these conditions together. Like I would know you're coming in advance, and I would know why you were coming in. So I would do my research and see which muscles are involved in that particular area of the body, and then I would do it. Well, I had been told while I was on the ship that I was getting arthritis in both of my thumbs. So I had to develop a technique that didn't use my thumbs, which is how I developed this thing where I put my fingers over the heel of my hand over my opposite fingers, because of the whole arthritis problem. Well, thumbs, the loss of the use of your thumbs happens to many massage therapists. I mean, there's many, many good, really excellent massage therapists who end up having to give up their career because of problems with their thumbs. But I don't use thumbs. So, I mean, I've been doing this now 38 years and still going strong.
So that's so interesting to hear. Never, as a layperson, never knew anything about, massage people quitting because of the thumb. I just thought that they just got tired of touching people.
Well, I would imagine that happens with some of them. My feeling because of the way I am, I find it boring. In fact, when I was on the ship, what I had to do was I had to make myself a routine because when I was doing the Swedish massage, because what had happened is I would start to daydream and go off someplace, and then I would forget whether I worked on your leg or not. And I'd be there, I'd be looking at it like at an angle. Does it look greasy? Right? It was terrible. So finally I had to make myself a routine. Well, I can see that I wouldn't have wanted to do 38 years of a routine.
Right.
But for me, every single person is different. Every person.
Okay. So I know we're going to be pressed for time. We can't cover everything in your 38 years. But was that the time that you developed your method when you had the arthritis? Because you actually, with all the stuff that you did, you came up with the Jules Stroke method.
Right.
And is that what you're talking about with the 3 fingers and the focused, therapy on the muscles and stuff?
Right. Well, Jules Stroke, which just means Julie Stroke, had to come up with a name for it somewhere, is a combination of that, that whole thing of not using your thumbs, but also myofascial release, which is an excellent technique. Many therapists do myofascial technique, because your fascia, it's way too complicated to get into, but it's the slimy stuff. Like if you're peeling the skin off of a chicken, that slimy stuff that's underneath the skin before the breast of the chicken,
right?
That's fascia, and we all have it. It's a vital piece of our body, and so myofascial release works with the muscle and the fascia in the muscle. So Jules Stroke is part myofascial release, part trigger point therapy, and a huge amount of osteopathic muscular therapy, which is what I call it. I call it osteopathic muscular therapy.
Okay. Now, I want to make sure that I don't forget your website, flexibleathlete.com.
Right.
Makes it sound like you worked with athletes for some time. And I would imagine athletes are one of the few breeds of people that are acutely aware of their muscles and joints and stuff like that. So what actually got you to the point where you were able to focus on athletes?
Well, they started finding me.
Oh.
Because, I would go to a marathon just to watch, or I would meet somebody and he or she would be some type of an athlete or a professional musician, like a symphony orchestra musician, which those are athletes too. You don't think about it, but they are. And so they would start coming in. Well, so you come in and you're a bodybuilder and I'm working on your shoulder and I make the pain go away. You go back to the gym, you tell 5 other people. And next thing I know, I've got 6 bodybuilders, you and 5 others. And then they know a runner. And it just kept snowballing.
All right. You caught my attention by saying the symphony.
Mm-hmm.
So help me understand, are we talking about muscles used in repetition? I'm imagining like a violinist or a cellist where they get,
Right.
cramps or something like that. Is that what we're talking about?
Yeah, I just had that happen. I went to the symphony on Saturday, and a woman that I'm friendly with she plays the viola, and she was in the symphony, so she had invited me. Well, she's like, her arm is up and her other arm is doing this for hours and hours and hours every day. They practice every single day for hours on end. And what happened, I had gone to the early show, and she said, I think my arm is falling off. So I pressed an important point, and she said, yeah, that's it. Right. So we ended up going back to her room, and I worked on that, and she was having some low back problems they get low back issues because they're sitting all the time. And that's the number one reason for low back pain. Anyway,
Really? It's sitting?
Yeah, exactly. People don't realize it, but it really is.
Interesting. So, okay, let's make a shift here, because most people that I know with things like lower back pain, office workers,
Mm-hmm.
basketball players, how different are they? It's the same pain, but I'm assuming for different reasons.
Right. But yeah, exactly. But it's really a repetitive strain injury.
Okay.
When you're sitting, the muscles that pulled you from standing to sitting, that enabled you to be able to sit down, contracted so that you could sit down. But then they're held contracted the whole entire time you're sitting down. And it's almost like the body says, well, you're not supposed to be that short, but clearly you want to be that short. Okay, poof, you're that short. But then you try to stand up. And now the muscle is too short for you to be able to stand up. And one of the key muscles originates on the front side of your lumbar vertebra. Everybody rubs their low back. They think it's the back side of the lumbar vertebra, but it's not. It's the front side. And your pelvis, because of your legs bending at your pelvis, at the top of the leg, the muscle that pulled it that way, that one's called iliacus, and then that one also shortened. You now try to stand up, but the iliacus is too short. So what it ends up doing is it makes your pelvis come down in the front, and it drags your lumbar along with it. So all of a sudden you have this horrible low back pain. And I think it's one of the most important techniques, that one in carpal tunnel, that I figured out since I started this whole thing, because most people and therapists don't think back to the iliacus as being one of the key muscles for low back pain.
Most of us don't know what the iliacus even is.
Exactly, and that's just it. And you don't know. So because you don't know where to go to rub it. And so you don't. But then you stand up after a long time, and your hip may hurt, your low back can hurt. It causes another muscle to shorten, so that ends up pulling on your knee, so you end up with knee pain. Or it pushes the bone, the pelvis, up into your sciatic nerve, so then you have sciatica. I mean, there's a whole laundry list. I wrote a book that's just about that.
All right, well, tell us the name of that book.
It's called The 15-Minute Back Pain Solution. And what it does, it walks you through in order, because it's the only treatment in the body that the order makes a difference. If you go out of order, it's not going to work. But if you go in exactly the order that I teach you, it works.
All right. And this is something that we could do on our own, or do we have to do it in conjunction with finding somebody like you?
No, You do it on your own.
Okay.
I do Zoom consultations all over the world for people, and they have the book. It's part of the Zoom consultation, and they have the book, and we meet on Zoom. And I have a client who was in Egypt, and he met with me once a month until he decided to become a Buddhist monk, which was kind of shocking. But anyway, he would meet with me once a month in Egypt and work on himself, and I would just teach him what to do.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So I knew about the book, and I was going to ask you about it. So the 15-minute back pain solution, a successful, proven 7-day program you can do at home, published. Now, this version that I see is published in 2014. So is there an updated?
Well, the thing is, muscles are evergreen.
Right.
And so there really is no
need to update.
I mean, sometimes I may go back and do it because I just read it just to make sure that everything's okay. But for the most part, I mean, it is what it is.
You also have a book called Treat Yourself to Pain-Free Living.
Right. Yeah.
And that's something where a lot of people talk about chronic pain.
Right.
And we're told by our medical society, well, you just have to live with it. And you're telling us
Absolutely.
that there are a lot of things that we can do ourselves.
Absolutely.
To relieve the pain. And in some cases, I'm not going to say cure because that's probably not the right term to use.
But you can eliminate it. You can release the. It's like if you pulled your hair really hard. Be a little hard for you, but I mean, if you pulled your hair really hard, your scalp hurts.
Yeah.
And while you're pulling it, you can't turn in the opposite direction. And if you try to turn in the opposite direction, it hurts worse. And if you keep pulling long enough, you're going to yank it out of your head, right? But you don't need aspirin for the pain. You don't need to massage your scalp, and you don't need brain surgery. All you need to do is let go of your hair. And truly, that is 100% what's going on with your muscles. Muscle inserts at a joint. When the muscle is tight, it's hurting the joint.
Interesting. So I know that as I've started my own journey with trying to, fix my unhealthy life, movement has been the thing that has been the most common. Get up and walk. Don't be sedentary.
Right.
And, when you mentioned the lower back pain, my first thought was a lot of office folks are being told to buy the standing desks now and not sit. But they're saying it for different reasons. They're saying it to stay mobile and sitting is, a sin, I guess, the way they look at it. And then, of course, things like drink water and all of that stuff.
Right.
But when it comes to the muscles, what are some things you can tell us that would, encourage us to get your books that we could start to do on our own?
Oh my gosh, Marv, you can treat literally from headaches to your eyes being tired to TMJ to not being able to turn your head to ear pain. Work your way all the way down the body, all the way to plantar fasciitis on your feet. I worked with didn't work with her actually. I was at a party one time and somebody said, "Boy, I wish you could fix my feet." I said, "What's wrong with your feet?" She says, "I have plantar fasciitis." I said, "Oh, that's an easy one to fix." She says, "No, it's not. I already spent $4,000 on this plantar fasciitis." I said, "No, really it is." So I have, tools of the trade. I always have a ball in my pocketbook. So I got the ball. We went in another room. I had her kneel down on the ball to show her how to do it. And she almost threw up because the pain was so intense. Just putting her leg onto that ball. But anyway, I talked her through it, and 15 minutes later, she got up and it was gone. And she said to me, "Why did I spend $4,000 on this and you got rid of it in 15 minutes? I said, "Because nobody looked at the muscles. They're looking at everything else, but they're not looking at the muscles."
Okay. I'm thinking back because I've had that pain. I played basketball and, I was told to just get up every morning and roll over a tennis ball for a few minutes or whatever.
You know what that is? That's doing this and then massaging your scalp.
Okay.
That's exactly what you did.
That's why it didn't work.
Right. Because it's not your foot, it's your lower leg. The only reason your foot does anything is because of the muscles of the lower leg.
Okay. All right. So those are tips we can find in the book to help us
absolutely
get our act together.
There's actually in the book too, there's charts that show you the shaded areas where you're feeling the pain, but the X is where the same colored X is where the spasm is. So you look at the shading to see where you're hurting, but then follow the same colored X, and then there's an arrow that points to the spasm.
Okay. So I'm going to have links to these. Now, there's, of course, the website, and if you click on products, it'll go to your shop where you can get the books, and I'll also have links on Amazon because that's where I found them. And there's a couple of other stuff on there, and your deep massage, well, you call it the perfect ball, the deep muscle massage ball.
Right.
And all of that stuff there. So we will link to all of that. We're coming close to time.
I'll talk fast. I'm from New York. I can do that.
Okay. When we did our pre-show chat, you had told me about the story of somebody that had a frozen diaphragm, and this basically related to just tight muscles.
Yeah, that's all it was. What happened with this gentleman, he's from Ohio, and I'm in Sarasota. And they come down to Sarasota for the wintertime. Nice to get out of Ohio in the wintertime.
Yes, it is. My wife is from Ohio, so.
So you know. Anyway, so what had happened was they go back and forth. But they were back up in Ohio now because it's season for them. And he couldn't breathe on his right side. His lung wouldn't fill. So he goes to the doctor, and it turns out, I find out the doctor never touched him. He did an MRI. The MRI showed that his diaphragm was not moving. So the doctor tells him that his diaphragm is paralyzed and there's nothing that can be done. So fortunately, this gentleman goes to see a naturopath down here in Sarasota. And the naturopath sends people over to me, other people. So he goes to see this naturopath, and the naturopath said to him, I don't think half of your diaphragm, he's saying the right side of the diaphragm is paralyzed. He says, I think you better go see Julie. So he comes over, and the first thing I do is I take my fingers and I'm kind of like scooping up behind his rib cage on the right side to get into the diaphragm. And I could feel that it was moving. I had him breathe, and it was moving a little bit. It wasn't moving the way it should, but it was moving a little bit. And I said to him, does that hurt? And he said, yeah, it hurts a lot. I said, well, if it hurts, it's not paralyzed. If it's paralyzed, you don't feel anything. And so then there are muscles in between your rib cage that have to expand and contract in order for you to be able to breathe. So I literally I'm just barely touching him. I'm trying to find the rib. So I'm barely touching him, and the poor guy almost elevates off the table. So I take his left hand and I bring it over to his right rib cage, and I said, just feel that. I want you to find the rib cage. So when he did, and he felt the pain, he said, I'm not even touching it. I said, yeah, exactly. You're not. And I wanted him to know that I wasn't going after him with razor blades, right? So anyway, I showed him, we found the spasm in between the ribs, in the muscle in between the ribs, and he was holding it. And then what you do is, so you apply pressure onto it for about 15 seconds, then stay where you are. Don't move your hand, but take the pressure off for about 5 seconds. And then 15 on, 5 off, 15 on, 5 off. You just keep doing that. And eventually, first of all, you're going to start realizing that when you have to go back on for the 15 on, you're having to push deeper to get to to feel anything because you're releasing it. And so sure enough, so finally I said to him, I want you to take a really, press it and hold it and take a good, deep, deep breath and really expand your rib cage, because it's as the rib cage expands, the lungs fill up. And as the lungs fill up, they push down on the diaphragm to make some room for the lungs to fill up. And then as he's breathing out, the ribs come back together again. The diaphragm goes back up. And I said to him, how do you feel? And he said, I feel great. I called him 2 days later, and he was back in Ohio. He had only come down to see this Dr. Miller and then come over to see me. And anyway, he was back up in Ohio. I said, how are you? He says, I'm great. He said, I'm fine.
Very, very interesting. I'm sure he was very glad that he got referred to you.
Yeah, absolutely. He's actually flying down again next week. I'm going to see him next week.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, Julie, let me ask this. I know that, of course, people can, get in touch with you. You do Zoom consultations. Are there others that are doing work similar to you?
My daughter is fully trained. She's up in New York.
Okay.
She's about 30 miles north of Manhattan on the New Jersey side of the Hudson River. So if anybody is interested in that, they can contact me and I'll give them her contact information, if they're up in New York. Other than that, I've been teaching people, but nobody has gone into it to the degree of my daughter Anne Marie and I. Although that's my goal.
Wonder why that is. I mean, they would need to. That's an opportunity for somebody.
Oh, it's a wonderful opportunity. The thing is, it takes work. It takes really learning the muscles. Like it's like this whole diaphragm situation. If I didn't know about the intercostal muscles, I would have thought that it was the diaphragm. It wasn't the diaphragm. So you have to really, really know your muscles so that you can follow the train back to the source. And so it involves thinking. And the work is more, I'm going to say intense, but it's not fluff and buff. It's
okay. I get it. I mean,
focused.
I imagine so. Just to be a massage therapy, I don't even know how long the program is, but it's not like going to school for 4 years. It can be done in a few weeks, right?
No, it's most of the schools are 8 months to a year.
Okay, so 8 months to a year. So in order to do what you're doing, you've got to be licensed. So that's part of it. Then you spent a year on a cruise ship learning muscles. I'm sure there's a faster way to learn muscles, but even that's going to take time, right?
Right. Well, that's going to take time. But what I do when I'm teaching massage therapists is I say it takes about a year to know what I know.
Okay.
And the reason is because I had to be figuring it out one step at a time. So it took me longer. But if you come in one day I'm going to teach you what might have taken me 2 months to learn or figure out, so you can learn it much faster than I learned it.
All right. Billy, I have one last question for you, and I hope you can answer this. What is it that makes you still love telling your story after 38 years?
And I do love telling it. It makes me so happy. I used to always say, when I was a child, Dr. Salk came up with the polio vaccine. And the nun was telling us how he made such a difference in the world, that he changed people's lives because he lived. And I remember at 10 years old saying, I want to do something that makes the world different because I lived. And now I am. Every day I am. And every day it's somebody, like I said, nobody comes in just to relax.
Right.
Everybody comes in because they have something going on that nobody's been able to figure out.
Well, Julie, thank you very much for being willing to share your story again. And thank you for putting up with my questions that are a little off the beaten path.
Nah, your questions were great. Your questions were great.
So I'm here in Florida. I may have to take a trip over to the left coast, and
Where are you?
I'm in Fort Lauderdale.
Oh, for heaven's sakes. It's just a hop, skip, and a jump.
It is.
And Sarasota is very nice. If you've never been to Siesta Key, I mean, it's the most beautiful beach in the world, they say.
So we tried to go over, I forget when, it was maybe 2 years ago. Sarasota's getting crowded. It's just as crowded as Fort Lauderdale is.
I know, but we don't have highways. You have 15 highways crisscrossing each other. I mean, it's horrible. It's horrible.
You've got, what, two main roads coming off 75 to go to the beach. You got the Beeline thing, right?
Bee Ridge.
Bee Ridge.
Well, so you have, they're just 4-lane roads.
Yeah.
They're not any, 6 lane, 3 in each direction. But they're just roads. It's like, where your shopping centers are and your grocery stores and all that are off those roads.
But my wife likes to go to the beach, and they're crowded.
To go to the beach, what I suggest you do is come on over like the night before, get a hotel, have a nice dinner, go out on the beach after dark. It's beautiful. And then be there in the morning and watch sunrise and just sit on the beach. And because the crowds don't start coming maybe until 10 or 10:30.
So here's the question, and we're way off of unhealthy now, but because you're over there. So we would always go to Naples, and we've been up to Fort Myers, but would come back to Naples, and of course the big thing is watching the sunset.
Right.
But watching the sunrise over there, I don't imagine.
No, you can't. On Siesta Key, you can.
Yeah?
You can, because say the beaches out here, sunrise is on this side of the beach, then the sun comes all over, and then you watch this side of the beach to watch sunset.
Okay. So we'll have to look up Siesta Key and figure that out.
Yeah,
all right.
It's lovely. It's really lovely. And give me a call when you have my phone number, I'm sure.
Yeah, we'll do that. We'll chat.
Yeah, that'd be wonderful.
Well, all right. Well, Julie, thank you again very much. And I can tell you this, I love the approach that you took to learn what you did, and now to share what you're sharing. And hopefully I'm going to figure out my back pain issue now. So
absolutely. Feel free to give me a call. I'll walk you through some things.
Okay. We'll do that.
Okay.
All right, folks. So
thank you, Marv.
Thank you. That's going to do it for this episode, folks. If you're listening and you're dealing with that mystery pain that nobody can explain, well, go check out Julie's resources, learn more about your muscles. They might be what's driving your pain, and you can explore some of the simple self-treatment ideas we talked about and in her books. So all the links will be there. You can connect with her, watch her demos, and see if it's a fit for you. And of course, if this episode resonated with you, share it with a friend or family member who's quietly struggling with their chronic pain. And as always, thanks for listening. Take care of your body. Question the easy answers. And remember, live healthy and be happy.